lot of times on Easter Sunday, I'm just going to spend a couple minutes here. We talk about the gospel accounts of Jesus being risen from the dead, or maybe we look in Romans at the theological weight of the resurrection. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to go earlier. We're going to be in John chapter 11 for just a few minutes. You know, funerals aren't funny, but funny things happen at funerals. I've been to a lot of them, and just weird things happen at funerals. I heard a story one time about a pastor, kind of new to town. He let the funeral director know that, you know, anybody that needed, even if they couldn't afford anything, he'd be happy to serve in that way. And it wasn't very long. We got a call and said, we've had a guy die. He's kind of a transient. We can't find any family. We can't find any friends. It would be nice if it's just going to be like you and the gravediggers at the funeral. But we've got kind of a potter's field. The county runs out of town there. It's on Smith Road. Would you go and do this? And the pastor said, I'd be happy to do this. 10 o'clock Tuesday morning. And he left about 9 o'clock. Got lost. It got to be about 10:15. He was horrified. He finally saw the guys out there with the shovels. He went out there. And as he walked to the grave, the whole scene just kind of struck him. Here's a guy that had no family, nobody to show up. But yet, here's a child of God. Here's somebody that Jesus loved enough to die for. So it just kind of hit him. He called those guys over, and just the preach hit him. You know, sometimes the preach just hits you. And he started in Genesis, and he went all the way to Revelation, okay? It took about an hour, and he preached for sin and forgiveness and redemption and the new birth. And he asked, there's a young guy and an old guy. He asked him, do they know Jesus? And the young guy, the older guy said he did, and the younger guy said he did, and prayed him through with all that, and then got in his car and drove away. And the young guy looked at the old guy and he said, you know, I haven't been doing this very long. Is that normal? And he said, son, I've been installing septic tanks for 35 years. And I ain't never seen anything like that before. Pastor missed a funeral. Jesus missed a funeral one time, okay? And it happens in John chapter 11. We're told in verse 1 that a friend of Jesus, a man named Lazarus, was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and his sister Martha. These were all good friends of Jesus, Mary, Martha, their brother Lazarus. Jesus would stay with them when he was in Jerusalem. Bethany's just a couple hours outside of Jerusalem, a couple miles rather, outside of Jerusalem. And so these were good friends of his. Mary, in fact, was the one that anointed Jesus' feet with perfume. And there's just a lot of history here. Martha was kind of the worrier. Mary was more the worshipful one. So these were good. Jesus knew them very, very well. And they had an ace in the hole here when their brother Lazarus got sick. They knew where Jesus was. He was about from here to the Quad Cities away from them. And so they sent a runner, probably a young man they sent to go get Jesus, because they knew if they could get Jesus here to touch Lazarus, that Lazarus would be healed. But Jesus hears about the illness, and he doesn't go anywhere. He doesn't do anything. He stays where he is 2 days. And he tells the disciples, this sickness will not end in death. No, it's for the God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. That seems very opposite to me. That he loved them and he didn't do anything for them. And after 2 full days go by, he tells his disciples, we're going to go wake Lazarus is asleep. We're going to go wake him up. And the disciples say, well, if he's sleeping, that's good. He'll get better. That's what you need to do when you're sick. You need to sleep. But Jesus says, no, it's deeper than that. Something bigger is going to happen. The disciples, by the way, did not want to go to Jerusalem because things were really heating up for Jesus. There was a lot of conflict, a lot of potential for death. But I love Thomas, who's always an optimist. He said, well, if he's going, let's go die with him. You know, let's if he's going to go die, well, let's just go die with him. And when Jesus gets near Bethany, Martha comes out to greet him, which was a little unexpected. You know, what happened when you had someone die? You would bury them that same day. That you would bury them immediately, wrap their body up in linen, put them in a tomb. And you were kind of expected to stay in your house for morning time, and you maybe would go to the grave or whatnot. People would come to you. You would stay in the house. But Martha, when she heard Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, and she says this, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Do you hear the disappointment? You know, I bet some of you, I bet a lot of you here today have questions about God because you prayed one time when you really needed him to show up, and he didn't show up. I'm told that Ted Turner was, when he was a young boy, went to a church-going family, and he grew up in church and was even talking about being a missionary. But when he was a young man, his sister died of lupus after a 5-year battle, and then his dad, in depression after that, later committed suicide. And he's kind of mellowed a little bit over the years, but he was once a very, very strident atheist. And, you know, his idea, I think, was if God was real, why wouldn't he have shown up in my moment of deepest need? Ted Turner, when he was a younger man, he called Christianity a religion for losers. And, you know, he's not much wrong with that, because the truth is we're all losers when it comes to God's holy requirements, but God has bridged that gap for us. He's died for our sin. He's rose again, and we don't have to be losers anymore in his eyes. But that deep disappointment, that can leave scars on us, and Martha has this. If you had been here, and you know, Martha is going to say, you know, Jesus is going to say to your brother's going to rise again. And Martha's going to say, I know he'll rise again at the resurrection. That's a good Sunday school answer. You know, I know the right answer. In the sweet by and by, one day he will rise again. I've learned that in synagogue. I knew that to be the truth. But then Jesus says this, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? You know, the message of Easter is bigger than Jesus is resurrected. It's Jesus is the resurrector. And the reason why I wanted to go to John 11 is because Jesus proclaims who he is. I am is the way that God introduced himself to Moses in the Old Testament. And here Jesus is saying, I am the resurrection. I am the life. They go and get married. Jesus talks to Mary. She says the same thing. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. And Jesus asks him, where have you laid him? And they said, come and see. The shortest verse in the Bible is Jesus wept. Jesus wept. Jesus is looking at Lazarus' tomb. Why does he weep? Well, he sees the power of death in that moment. And he's looking at a tomb with the stone rolled over it. Jesus is seeing something of his own future. He's going to have to defeat death by going into it and destroying it from the inside out. He sees the separation of death. And as he weeps and he's emotional there before the tomb of his friend, he says, I want you to roll the stone away. Now, Martha's the practical one. She's there. And she said, Lord, there's going to be an odor. If you've ever smelled the stench of death, it's something that you can never forget. It's an unmistakable odor. And 4 days in the tomb, how they would do this is they would wrap the body of the deceased up. They would put him in the tomb. They'd roll the stone over. And they would wait several months, and the body would totally decay and dry out, and later they'd come and collect the bones. But you never unrolled that stone at this stage of the game. The King James Version says, Lord, he stinketh. Okay? I love that King James word, stinketh. I think that's maybe the only place in the Bible where it uses the word stinketh. Lord, he stinketh. And Jesus said, no, I want you to roll the stone away. And Jesus, and the Bible describes him as emotional at this point. Jesus is emotional. He says, Lazarus! An ancient commentator on this verse said that if Jesus wasn't specific here, every dead thing within the sound of his voice would have come to life. He's the resurrection, and he's the life. Lazarus, come forth. And his friend Lazarus comes hopping out of that tomb, wrapped up like a mummy in those grave clothes. And Jesus said, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Now, the ironic thing is this miracle is the very thing that made the religious leaders decide they had to kill Jesus, because this was too big, this was too much, it was something they could not possibly explain away. They had to get rid of Jesus at this point. Silly priests, silly Pharisees, silly Romans, silly Pilate. You can kill the resurrection, you just can't keep him dead. He's the resurrection, and he is the life. I love what Peter preached here in Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost. It says, God raised him from the dead, freeing him from the agony of death, because it was impossible for death to keep hold on him. You can't keep the resurrection dead. He's the resurrection, and he's the life. I wonder if anybody here needs a resurrection. I wonder as you hear about us talking and singing and preaching about new life, that something's kind of grinding in your heart right now. That there's a new beginning in faith that you need. I want to give you an opportunity to make that real in your life right now. That nudge, I want to give you an action step for that. And that's praying that this would be a day of new birth for you. A day of new beginning. Not just that Jesus is resurrected, but that Jesus is the resurrector. And he wants to resurrect your heart. He wants to give you the assurance of eternity, because he's the only one that's gone into death and exploded it from the inside. The Bible calls him the first fruits of the resurrection, because his resurrection is our resurrection too. Would you pray with me? I'd like you to bow your heads and hearts. As we close worship here, let's just have a moment of honesty in our hearts before the Lord. Are you dead inside? That nudge you feel right now in your heart is the Holy Spirit knocking at the door, saying, I want to come into that. I want to roll that stone away. I want to give you a new start and a new birth. Jesus, we breathe in your Holy Spirit right now. We accept the forgiveness of the cross. We accept the new beginning of the resurrection. We praise you, Jesus, that you offer this to us today, right here, Easter 2022. This can be our moment, our time to give you our big yes. I will serve you. I will follow you. I will receive the life that you give that's found only in your name. Thanks be to God.